Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on YouTube. I hope you liked the video that we just posted on the ice storm and the roses. As I mentioned, we had just about 6/10 of an inch of sleet, tremendous amount of sleet for our area, and about just shy of 1/3 of an inch of ice, 3/10, which is some of the highest ice amounts we've ever seen here in eastern North Carolina. So day 2, we warmed up to near freezing yesterday. Really didn't do too much with the ice. Luckily today we're going to be up to about 45 degrees, so that's certainly good news. But last night we got down to 17. So today's video is going to show you a little bit behind me what's going on with the roses. The bottom line is we won't know what those cold temperatures will do to them until the spring. So I want to show you a little bit about what's going on in the garden and also talk about cold weather and roses, because it just depends where you live, the impact. So real pretty morning. It was very humid, a lot of moisture in the atmosphere last night, and since we got cold, a nice frost developed on the roses. So they still have the ice, and you can see that from the pictures from the ice storm itself. Some of it melted, but most of it stayed, and I'm glad that kind of kept the rose encrusted in the ice. Maybe that protected it a little bit. But it's real pretty this morning with the frost on the roses. Certainly a wintry scene. Our low is actually 17, which is cold for eastern North Carolina. And that's what I want to talk about with regards to cold weather. When I first started growing roses, it was in upstate New York, just west of Binghamton. I mentioned that I'm used to cold weather, and roses there had to commonly deal with temperatures in the teens and single digits for lows, and usually at least a few times a year getting below 0. So I didn't lose any roses up north though due to cold. A couple factors for that. The bud union I talk about a lot. That's where the actual graft of rose is. So whatever variety you have, it's grafted to a rootstock unless it's own root. So in this case it's Let Freedom Ring. So everything above that covered up bud union is Let Freedom Ring. So up north we would plant our bud unions below the soil by a couple inches. In addition, since it got so cold, I would put leaves, chopped up leaves over them in the fall, pretty substantial depth. And anytime we got snow, I was thankful because that acted as an insulator. I would actually use a snow blower and blow the snow onto the roses. That combined with the planting was on the south side of the house, kind of up against some white vinyl siding. That kept it a little warmer during the day. So I think the combination of everything, planting the bud union below the ground, protecting it, and planting on a southern exposure of a house helped. Here in North Carolina, we don't get quite as cold usually. We moved here in late 2016 and the garden was put in 2017. In fact, these 2 beds here were the first ones. And in 2018, our first full winter, we got down to 7 degrees and I lost a couple roses. And you might say, well, you didn't get below 0. Why did you have more of an issue in North Carolina than you did in New York? A couple factors. Number one, we have variable temperatures here in the wintertime. Our average high is in the 50s. We do get below freezing quite a few times, but many times we have 50s, 60s, and 70s during the winter. And you can see these leaves are all leafed out. So that makes them much more vulnerable to the cold. Whereas up north, I had, consistent cold and the rose would go dormant. So that's number one. Number two, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this because all my bud unions are covered up, thankfully, because I thought it might get cold. Not quite this cold, but I'm lucking out that I covered these things up a couple weeks ago. But down south, especially in my garden, I plant on Fortuniana. This hot princess, along with many of my roses, is grafted on Fortuniana. And that graft is meant to stay above ground a couple inches. So the bud union is actually exposed to the elements. So the variability of our winter, up and down, the fact that the roses might be leafed out, and the fact that that bud union is usually above ground makes it more vulnerable. Right now, what you're seeing if you haven't watched my prior videos is the bud union is covered up with leaves and in some case compost, because I did a video on just using leaves in the garden, and instead of spreading it out in the whole garden. Thankfully, I decided instead of just throwing them all through the bed, I focused them by the bud union. So I'm hoping that will help out. Couple things I have going in my factor. That first winter where we got down to 7 and I lost some roses, they weren't established. So these beds have been here 5 years now. So those should be okay. These beds here have been here, I think 4. I'm losing track, I'll have to look at my notes. These beds here, 3 years. And this one, some of them have been here 3 years. Some of them have only been here 1.5 years to 2. So of any of them, this might be the one most vulnerable because they're the youngest. But the year I lost roses because of the cold, a lot of those had just been planted less than 9 months earlier, or in some cases 4 months earlier. So they were very vulnerable to the cold. So that's it for today. Just wanted to show you what the garden looks like. I think it looks pretty in the grass. You can see the wild onion and garlic popping up through the centipede lawn, but it still looks pretty. Nice frosty morning, and we'll get rid of this snow and ice here. Highs today in the 40s, so we'll get back to normal. But like I said, I won't know the effect of the cold until springtime. And again, the ice is not hurting these roses. None of them have bent over except the Pope John Paul, the second I showed you, and none of these have snapped. So again, if you have major ice or snow coming your way, it's a good idea to trim your roses down a little bit. We did this in the fall, and that's kind of a general good practice, no matter where you're watching us from. Give your roses a light trim in the fall. As I mentioned in the prior video, a light trim. You don't want to hack them because then you don't have a margin for error if you have a really cold winter. If you just give them a light trim, that makes them less susceptible to bending and breaking in snow, wind, and ice. And by leaving a lot of the cane on the bush, it also gives you room to prune out anything that dies because of the cold winter. I'll last leave you with the climbing roses, which are the tallest ones I have. Dublin Bay, a pretty red rose, but these are secured to our trellis, so not as concerned with them cracking. But you can see a fair amount of ice and frost on them. I'm sure they're looking forward to warming up here later today. And then some new blueberry bushes. I've got the 4 originals and then 2 there, hopefully producing some nice berries come spring. Have a good one, everyone. Comment below what's going on where you live. Are you warm? Are you cold? Are you looking forward to spring? I certainly am myself, and I'll leave you with these Carolina blue skies.